Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Chairman and CEO of Stagwell, Inc., and also Chairman of the Harris Poll, Mark Penn. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
A new Harvard CAPS Harris Poll just came out, so I'm excited to have you on and you can break it down for us. First, as we sit here right now, we're about 6 months away from the November election. So to start off the conversation, how are voters feeling about the presumptive nominees, both Donald Trump and President Joe Biden?
Well, I think the voters have concerns about both nominees, but an election is a choice and they have to make one. We don't really know when we do polls today what choice they're going to make on election day, but I know what choice they would make if the election was held today. I think our poll shows Trump with about a 4-point lead, and it expands if you put all the independent candidates in to 5 or more points. And so that's a pretty decisive lead, because if the popular vote was really more for Trump, that he would kind of sweep the swing states. So right now, I think the polling is favoring Trump. There was a period here where it looked like it was tightening for Biden, but I think that period has passed right now. I think that the most important questions, and I'll just focus you on 2 questions, which is, do you approve of the job that Joe Biden was doing as president? 44%. Did you approve of the job that Donald Trump did as president? 55%. And so ultimately, even if they have reservations about both people, if they think one person did a better job as president and they're voting for president, that's who has the edge right now, unless those attitudes change in the coming months.
As you said, a 4-point lead is pretty decisive. And when we look back at past polling, both in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, she was ahead of Donald Trump in the polls, and 2020 with Biden-Trump, Biden was ahead of the polls. So now looking at these numbers today, is this especially worrying to Biden?
Yes, because Biden, as you point out, has not been in the position here of really being behind at this point. Trump has never been in the position of being ahead at this point. So that puts him better positioned to regain the presidency, certainly than most people predicted, certainly than I would have. If you'd asked me a year ago, would I have said that he would have this kind of lead and that there would be Trump presidential nostalgia out there to the extent that there seems to be? I wouldn't have predicted it. I wouldn't have predicted how easily he won the Republican nomination and brought back his coalition. You know, I look at the poll, and men in particular are moving to Trump. I think women are sticking with Biden, have a lot of concerns about Trump, but I think the real movement is among men of all types across all races, parties, and ethnicities.
That's really interesting. We're seeing that type of Trump nostalgia because the time from 2016 to 2020, when you look back and really think about it, it was a pretty divisive time for this country. Do you think voters now and Trump supporters and people likely to vote for Trump are looking back at his presidency with rose-colored glasses because his approval rating sits at 55%?
Well, yes, they didn't give him 55% at the time. So either there's nostalgia going back, or they say, oh, in retrospect, we would have been better off had we stuck with Trump for another term. Maybe we should give him a chance. Look, right now, the choices are really only between Biden and Trump, look, they generally think that the economy was better under Trump and that he did a better job managing the economy. And that's central issues here are immigration and inflation. And those are 2 issues that Trump was always out early on immigration. That was an issue that most people didn't care about, and it really kind of burst on the scene. And I don't think the demonstrations that you're seeing now on campus, they're surely not hurting Biden. I think the president finally came out and gave a speech, but he's been quiet for 9 days on that. And, Donald Trump wouldn't have been quiet for 9 days.
Let's continue to talk about Donald Trump just a little bit before we get to Biden. As we know, he's facing legal trouble. He's been in a Manhattan courtroom over the past couple weeks with only recesses on Wednesdays. Because he's kind of hindered here in the court of law, do you think that's hurting his campaign chances because it's less time he's out on the road?
Well, ironically, the less Trump says things, the better he does. So the evidence was he did a lot better when they kicked him off X or Twitter, and than he did when he was on it. So I don't know whether it's heard or not from the campaigning, and right now the legal cases don't seem to be working against him. And whether or not it's going to work against him if he's convicted, that's a different story. We have questions on that. It shows it might make some difference, a couple of point difference, or make the race even. But who really knows? We can't predict things that are unprecedented in any really accurate way. Just as I used to, when I was working with President Clinton, the Washington Post said, "Oh, if he's impeached, he'll have to resign," and I said, "No, that's not the case." And in fact, not only was that not the case, but he successfully beat back the impeachment and finished his term. We don't know what's going to happen here if he's convicted. We don't know what's going to happen if he's found innocent in this New York case. And that is a real, more than a real possibility here, even in New York, and even with the deck stacked, because of the interesting thing that they have several lawyers on the jury, and I've never heard of lawyers being on the jury. So it's kind of it'll but as I look at it, the people are not factoring those cases much into it, and the question is, will they? I mean, that's the biggest thing the Democrats have going for them. If he's convicted of something, Joe Biden will be able to say, can you appoint a convicted felon to the presidency?
President Biden's approval rating right now, according to your poll, is at 44%. When you and I talked in March, his favorability rating was also at 44%, so it has not moved. What does that mean for President Biden?
Well, I think that he is on kind of the edge at 44%. Could he get reelected at 44? To get reelected, you need at least, say, 47% voting for you, and then there'll be a third party. Do you have enough people who could vote for you? Generally, if he was between 40 and 42, I would say it's really impossible. And I'd say if he was at 47 to 52, I'd say shoe in. He is at the bottom of what still could win, right? Given that he's going to make it a referendum on Donald Trump. He's going to make it on, do you really want this back? Do you really think Donald Trump's a threat to democracy and MAGA Republicans governing? He's got his storyline down, and his storyline is not one that is going to win 60% of the vote. It's either going to win or lose by a very small percentage, because when you put the issues that starkly and about these things, the country has been in the last couple elections very evenly divided. But no, Biden hasn't moved. His State of the Union moved him for a short period of time, and attitudes towards him are pretty well set. And having, a lot of things kind of blew up. The world blew up, inflation blew up. Now he's got an economy that's going better on metrics of jobs and growth than expected. There was no recession, but the voters continue to look at inflation, and inflation is interesting in the fact that it really impacts everybody. Whether or not there's more unemployment or not tends to impact a selected percentage of people who are unemployed or not. Inflation affects more or less everybody, and that's why it's so devastating as an issue in politics.
Inflation and immigration, tied for the top issues facing voters. These are two issues Donald Trump has stumped on, has been on the offensive on. Democrats, within the past year, more on the defense. So knowing that these two issues are the top issues for voters, what does this mean for both Biden and Trump?
Well, look, Trump can run on Trump nostalgia. He can run on, hey, I told you what was going to happen with immigration and inflation. Those are his three things. And I don't think that Biden is going to join. He's not going to, doesn't look like he's going to do anything significant in immigration, though I've said really it's a problem he cannot allow to continue to fester. On inflation, he's really doesn't have any policy. The budget's set. The appropriations bills are passed. There's not going to be any change in spending or any real policy. As you can see, he's courting young people. He's put in the marijuana lightened up on marijuana. He's put in as much student relief, so he's looking to do that. He's looking to rally minorities. He's looking he's looking to rally women on abortion. I think that his strategy is a little bit more of slicing the electorate into a number of different groups and appealing strongly to those groups so that they'll have high turnout on election day. And I think Trump, even though he has a dedicated base, is actually trying to appeal more broadly on these big issues of inflation, immigration, and disorder.
Let's now look abroad a bit. As we look back at the Biden presidency, two major wars have unfolded around the world since he took office. Do Americans and voters here think that he's done a good job handling international issues?
Well, Americans think Biden hasn't done a good job on international issues. They don't give him good approval ratings. They're really concerned about weakness and whether or not we've been able to deter aggression around the world. I think that when you look at it, the support for the Ukraine has been flagging. Support for Israel is much stronger than you would guess based on the demonstrations going on, and seems to have really remained unchanged. And accountability for Biden is, well, would these situations have happened with a stronger president? What are we doing other than supplying arms to people to try to bring, these situations to a conclusion and a peaceful end?
Let's talk about Israel a bit and the Israel-Hamas war. Since October 7th, we have seen a rise in anti-Semitism. We've also seen voters vote uncommitted in protest to Biden's handling of the Middle East conflict. How do voters feel about this conflict overall?
Well, overall, we have some straightforward questions, and we say, are you basically more supportive of Israel or Hamas? And that's really the basic conflict that's going on now. And that comes out 80-20, and it really has been unchanged. Among young people, it's more 57 Israel, 43 Hamas. Some of the polls were 50-50. It's a smaller sample. But among seniors, say it's close to 95-5, 93-7 for Israel. So there is a huge generational divide on the issue. But overwhelmingly, then, when we dig down and say, well, look, do you think there should be a ceasefire? Oh, yeah, absolutely, there should be a ceasefire. But when do you think there should be a ceasefire? Oh, only when Hamas has released hostages and they've given up control of Gaza. So the real point here is that Israel is supported, and we even asked directly, even though there'd be civilian casualties, should they continue their effort to end Hamas? And the answer is about 2/3 say yes. And so there's very strong underlying support, particularly if you're above age 24 or above age 40 in particular, for Israel. And it hasn't changed 1 point. So if anything, the demonstrations have called into question what's going on in our universities more than anything else.
That's really interesting because if you look nationwide, these anti-Israel encampments and protests are popping up universities across the country. Just before you and I spoke, President Biden actually made remarks on this since police raided Colombia, and we've seen really these encampments reach a boiling point. And he spoke out against violence and hate speech when it comes to these protests. He also said the protests aren't changing his mind when it comes to his Middle East policy. Do you think that that's a stance voters will agree with?
I think they've been waiting for him to come out. I think he took a long time to come out. I think when you see, when voters see on television people taking the American flag down and putting another flag up, or a Palestinian flag, or what have you, that's not going to sit well with the majority of American voters. The overwhelming majority are looking at these pictures in horror. What's going on? People people are calling, for destruction of Jews and destruction of Israel, and I think they're really wondering, what exactly is going on in these campuses and how we're going to restore order. And I think that the university presidents and the universities that let it at first grow, every one of them realizes that it doesn't stop. It just keeps growing and then taking over more rather than less. And then they have to call the police in. And that happened at Columbia. It's happening at UCLA. And finally, the president is coming out. But they didn't stop this in the beginning when tents started to arrive. And now they have to do it at the end. University of Chicago, same thing now. We'll see what happens. The tents, and they're saying, well, as long as they're with tents, but then the demonstrators and the agitators, and then it turns out when they arrested people, only about half of them were actually students, and the rest of them are, people who came, some of them agitators. So this is really, playing out in a way that certainly people are not helping their cause in what they're doing. A lot of people are questioning what's going on in the universities, and I'm not seeing attitudes that are supportive. And 56% supported the full funding of Israel. I'm not seeing those attitudes change by even a point.
We're seeing this play out at elite universities in this country, like UCLA, like Yale, like Columbia. How do voters feel about this happening at those elite institutions?
Well, they're beginning to question now what is going on. If they're out demonstrating for Hamas, or even as Sheryl Sandberg did a film about the sexual violence, that Hamas did, and she wondered, how can any young woman possibly be out there, in these encampments if they watched her film and understood, the violence and brutality, that occurred. And I think, Americans now are questioning, well, if this is what they're thinking about this on university, what else is going on there? And I think it's really opened up the university, which we saw had problems on this. That several university professors got fired. I think those questions are growing. And we asked in the poll, do you think there's something wrong? Almost 2/3. And then we asked them, well, what do you think is wrong? And the answer that people came back was, well, we think that they're teaching racially divisive ways in the classes now. And they're beginning to blame what's going on in the classes for what's now going on outside the classes. And they think there's a direct connection here. And I don't know if there's going to be a reformation or change or a resetting of some of the education, but certainly the voters now are looking at the universities and asking some big questions.
This has been a big talking point, a big stumping point, education in this country, higher education for Republicans. Do you think that this issue is going to help President Trump and then in turn hurt President Biden in the poll?
Well, I never like to predict how issues are going to come out when they're in the middle, because issues have a way of offending. But I would again say, so far, having universities be out of control, and the president not having spoken until today, I think that left a clear field for the Republicans. Schumer came out, but that was not until Mike Johnson showed up on Columbia and was heckled and declared his strong support and opposition to these kinds of demonstrations that are not about free speech, but are taking over property and defacing buildings and threatening, putting up signs that deliberately threaten Jews. But how is it that Johnson got out there first, Trump got out there first, and Schumer and Biden got out there second? I think those were mistakes on their part. Can they correct them? Like I said, it's not over until it's over. But the Republicans got to jump on this issue, no question.
There was reporting that between pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian protesters on the University of Alabama's campus within the past few days, the one thing that they agreed on is in unison they were chanting F Joe Biden over this issue. So that was the only moment of agreement there. Do you think that President Biden's making remarks today was any type of course correction?
I think his making remarks was a welcome course correction. I think he had to get out there and lay a marker down that there is a difference between free speech, holding a rally at a time and a manner with a permit, and then going home and setting up tents and taking over buildings and campuses and defacing property and holding up signs that threaten Jews and that are anti-Semitic in nature. And I think the president laid out exactly that difference, as he should have, and I'm glad he did it.
Mark, as we sit here, like I said at the top of our conversation, we're 6 months out from the presidential election. Between now and then, as we know, anything and everything can change. But what are you specifically looking out for?
I'm looking at, does the president respond on immigration? Does Donald Trump get convicted? Can the president show that he's up for a second term? Because a lot of people think age is a factor. Does inflation come down and the Fed start to lower interest rates? Boy, there are a lot of things outstanding here that could have 5, 10 impact, 10, well, easily 5-point impacts on the race. So if anyone wants to call it over, it's not over. But it is in the middle now. We're not in the beginning. A lot of attitudes here are set, right? They're not going to change, overnight. There's a lot of events that can occur. We'll still have to see the conventions. Will the Democratic convention be a stellar convention? Will there be demonstrations that disrupt it? Will it look chaotic like 1968? I think a lot of Democratic strategists are figuring out how to avoid that now. Will the Republican convention look like it was in 2020? Will it be different? 2016 was a really bizarre convention. There's so much left here that, just buckle up in your seatbelts. And as a voter, and, I hope the voters will get, more informed about the issues, what's really happening with the budget, inflation, what is happening with immigration, what is foreign policy, what role should the U.S. play. These are the big questions that used to be considered in elections. And whether or not the voters talk about it or they just talk about, irrelevant smaller issues, those are the issues that will really be decided in this election.
Definitely a lot of questions that need to be answered, but for now, we will leave it there. Mark, Penn, per usual, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Glad to be here.